Hello, welcome. Well, actually, let me make this bigger so that they can see us. Now we can wave. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Watercolor Snacks. We are playing with the summer box still. We're still in summer. It may be fall-ish outside, but we're still playing with the summer box. For those of you who don't know, I'm Sarah, co-founder of Art Snacks, and I'm going to be the timekeeper today and the producer. So I will be minimizing myself, but Amelia will be teaching our session today. So Amelia, let me just configure this and I am going to minimize myself. Have fun.
Thanks. All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another live stream session of Watercolor Snacks. Like Sarah said, we are still playing around with all the materials from the summer box. So I'll do just a really quick intro of what I have here in just a minute or two, and just recap what we've got to work with here. So just a quick introduction to me. If you are tuning in maybe for the first time, my name is Amelia. I'm an illustrator. I live in Baltimore, Maryland, and I am the artist in residence for Watercolor Snacks, and I'm very happy to be sharing some fun watercolor tips and techniques with you. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce the materials that I have here. So I have, this is Fabriano watercolor cold press. It's really nice. It's already in a square shape. So if you're somebody who likes to share your artwork on social media, it's already kind of formatted to that nice square shape, which is really great. We've got a couple of really great brushes. If I can pick them up. It's kind of hard to pick up 3 round brushes. They're rolling out of my hands. So we've got the King Art. These are round brushes in 3 different sizes. So we have a large, medium, and small, which is really great. The round size is an awesome brush shape. It's really versatile because you can get really broad, wide strokes, as well as narrow, thin, very fine strokes. So we have a great little set right here. And then we've got the Van Gogh. This is the museum set of watercolors in pans. So you can see I've already been using them. They're a lot of fun, really great, vibrant colors, but this is also a really good set for mixing. It has some pretty basic mixing colors, which is based off of Van Gogh's palette that he used as well. So it's a really nice classic palette with some nice vibrant colors. And then one of the other things that came in the box is this fun washi tape that I designed that has just some nice flowers on it, very summery. So we have those there. And then I'll just show you really quickly a couple of extra bonus things that I have with me that if you have them, great. If you don't, no problem. But I do have another palette for mixing colors outside of my palette here. But the great thing about this travel palette is that it does have a little area for mixing. So don't stress if you don't have a palette. You can absolutely do it in your case. I do have 2 cups for mixing my paint. I almost said mixing my water now. I'm going to, some of this water is meant to be kept clear for mixing my paints. So I think that's what I was trying to say. So I can add some nice clean water to my paints when I'm trying to dilute it more and add more to my paint mixture. And then one is for cleaning off my brush. So this will be 1 cup for dirty water, and then one will be kept clean, so I can always be adding nice clean water to my paint mixture. And then one other thing, or actually 2 other things that might be handy for you to have. I do have just a mechanical pencil off to the side. Any pencil that you have will do, though. And then a ruler, too, because I'm going to show you a technique that you might want to try since we're working from a photo reference. This might be something that you'll want to use when I show you what I'm working with. Oh, and lest I forget, also just having a paper towel handy is really great. I use it for blotting up if I have too much water on my paper, or if I need to dry off my brushes, if I need to clean off my brushes. It's just really handy to have. So I always just kind of fold it up and tuck it underneath of my palette, and then just kind of have that off to the side. So that's everything that I have handy for painting today. So I'm going to move some things out of the way. So they're here just off screen. All right, so I've already pulled a piece of paper out of my palette to work on, and I've also printed out a copy of the reference image that I'm going to be using. So if you haven't seen it yet, this is a picture from a website called Pexels. I really like Pexels because it has tons of royalty-free images. That means that they're free for non-commercial use. So if you're an artist looking for reference images, you just want to practice looking at a reference, that's a good place to get some things from. So that's where I got this. If you're curious where to find this picture, it is posted on ArtSnacks Mix under the class prep for today. So you can absolutely go and find that picture. I do also have it handy over here on my iPad, which I was just charging off to the side here. So I'm just going to pull that up for you really quick so you can see, because my printer did kind of mute the colors a little. So they are much more vibrant. So if you're looking on a screen, you'll see that they're a little bit darker. I am going to have that off to the side for myself, just so I can kind of compare the two, so that if I need to see more details, I can. So on here, you'll notice that I have some squares drawn. So if you've ever taken a drawing class, you may have learned the technique for doing a grid drawing. You can also use it for a painting. I thought it might be helpful since it's mostly a lot of areas of different colors, but we do have some details here in the middle. And I thought it might be helpful just to have a little extra structure to the reference so you could kind of figure out where things go and how to place them when we're doing our painting. So I've just measured 1 inch by 1 inch boxes. This piece of paper is the exact same size as my watercolor paper. So you can see they line up really nicely. I do have a little bit of extra white on around my photo, but that's okay because I can kind of figure out where the top of my picture will be, because, you know, I can kind of just measure the last little bit of the square will line up with this. So I'll kind of know where to start. And you could even, if you wanted to, just kind of line it up like this. You could just make yourself a little notation of where the bottom of the image will be. So I'll know this is kind of where I'll want to end my painting if I want to keep the same border. The other thing you could do is just paint into the white space and just expand it out that way. So that's another option for you. But I am going to set this off to the side, and I'm going to open up my palette and start prepping my colors. So this came in last quarter's box, but I do have a little spray bottle. If you have one, great. If not, no problem. You can always just use a damp brush to activate your colors. But I like to give my watercolors a little spray. I had to move it out of the way so I didn't get water everywhere. But I do just kind of wake them up a little bit with some water just to activate them, and makes it a little easier to start pulling paints from the pans and putting them into my palette. So I'll bring this over so you can see this a little better. So what I'm going to do is kind of identify some of the colors that I see in here. So there's definitely this nice bright orange and yellow. So I'm going to start by pulling some of those warmer colors. So I'm going to pull some of this orange. Just put that into a palette. I'm just kind of swiping it along the side so it'll roll down into the palette. Let's see, this will be my brush washing cup. All right, so I'm getting a nice little puddle of paint here. And then another tool that I've found really handy to have is a pipette. If you don't have one, you can certainly just take a brush and dip your brush into your water cup like this. And then just do the same thing. Start to kind of swipe your brush against the side, and that will bring some water into your palette. But if you do have a pipette, it's a little bit of a shortcut for getting water, your clean water, into the well, because you can just squeeze a little water and drip it in. So these are pretty easy to find. They're inexpensive. I may have even gotten this in a kit of something else. I don't know, but I'm someone, and I think a lot of artists are like this. I will save a lot of weird objects because I will be like, I think I can use that for something. So that may have been one of my weird objects that I've saved, but you can definitely find these pipettes if you want to purchase some. Okay, so I definitely am seeing some of this orange color, and I'm seeing some yellow. So I'm gonna grab some of this darker yellow over here. Same process. Getting some nice, thick, vibrant paint here. And water from the pipette. Okay. All right, and some other colors that I'm seeing. I'm definitely seeing a lot of blue and some purple. So what I'm actually going to do is, rather than, well, actually, there's an indigo, but there's not a purple on the palette. So we're going to have to mix purple. So I'm going to grab, I think this might be the indigo blue, but let me check for you. If you're unsure of the color, you can always just peek on the side. This is indigo. So it's like a dark, really dark blue. And I'm going to pull some of that and put that in this well over here. Okay. And then I am going to grab some of this. This is, I think, Rose Madder, right? This is, let me check the color for you. Yep, Madder Lake Deep. So this is kind of a cool red color. So it's not going to be as vibrant as crimson. It almost looks like a really dark pink color. But it's a cooler temperature red. So it's still red. It's just not like a crimson fire engine or brick red color. Okay. All right, so I've got those as my base colors. And then I think I'm going to grab just a little bit of this Payne's Gray over here. And I'll just add some. And I'm going to use the Payne's Gray as a way to darken my colors, because this is a cool dark gray, but it's not quite as dark as black or lamp black. So it will darken up the colors. It's also going to cool them down a little bit since it's a cooler gray. Okay. So now I have some colors established. I'm just going to set this off to the side. And I can always pull more if I need it. So that's why it's kind of over there. All right, and I'm starting with my biggest brush just because that is going to be able to help me cover more area of my paper, more surface area. So I want to make sure my paintbrush is nice and clean. And so looking at my grid that I have, I know this last row here, let me just make a line for myself so I don't forget. My last row, this is where I'm gonna end the bottom. Okay, so this fire here is going to be roughly about here in these bottom two squares, and it's pretty much exactly in the middle, which is really nice. So we've got 3 squares on the outside, so I know as I'm painting that's where my fire is going to be. And then I've got some figures here, which you are welcome to keep in, or you can take them out if you want. But the great thing about doing the grid drawing is that you have those lines to help you figure out where everything is supposed to go. So if you have always had a hard time kind of looking at something and then figuring out where exactly it's supposed to go on the page, this is a really great method for just keeping track of how to draw on there. And I know my drawing's really light. I'll hold it up for you in just a moment. And I'm not worrying about adding a lot of detail right now because I'm going to paint over top of it. So having a detailed drawing isn't important for me right now because I'll just fill in that information later. I just need to kind of know where things are going to go. Like that. So let me hold this up so you can see it's extremely simple. Just kind of getting the basic shapes in there and knowing where things are going to be. So when I'm painting, I can kind of plan ahead and know that I don't want to go too far down the page with my background for where I'm going to paint this sky. Okay, so now that I've done a little bit of pre-planning, I'm going to go ahead and start adding some paint. So the first thing I'm going to do is, from my clear water jar, I am going to use my biggest brush, and this is why I cleaned it off. I'm just going to take clean, clear water, and I'm going to start by getting the paper wet. And what this is going to do is soften up the paper, but also get the fibers wet so that when I go to add my wash of watercolor paint, it will flow really easily and softly. So you don't have to be super pretty about it, just make sure that you don't have any dry patches that you miss. And again, having the grid underneath is really, really helpful because I can kind of get a sense of how far down I want to go, where the water line is going to be, and where I want to have a little more definition before I get to the fire. And I did mention this before, but this is a scene on a beach, since we have a beach theme for the summer. And we are kind of in that in-between time where summer is changing into fall, which is one of my favorite times of year. I love late summer, early fall. But I do think about some of those activities that, we might still be going to the beach even though it's starting to get chilly. And the sun sets earlier. It's a great time for bonfires, that kind of stuff. So that's kind of what inspired me to pick this scene when I was thinking about it. All right. So I am grabbing some of this indigo blue. So that was that blue that we grabbed, different from the Payne's Gray, if you remember. And so now what I'm going to do is a wet and wet wash technique. So just dragging my paintbrush across the top and trying to get a nice even layer. I might actually want to mix in some Payne's Gray here. Still feels a little light. It's better. And I'm just trying to kind of drag the paint across. This feels a little bit dry for what I'm trying to do, so I'm just going to spray my paper a little to get it more wet. But if your paper's feeling dry, just add more water with your brush, and that will help. But what you want is the paper to be wet enough that the paint flows across the paper, but you don't want it to be so soggy wet that you have a huge puddle of paint across your paper either. So you don't want too much. You just want enough that it helps the brush move the paint along the paper. Now, ideally, I would have this on some type of surface or block and then tilt it up a little bit. And that would actually make it, that way gravity would help me. But I have my paper just flat today. So if you're able to prop up your paper, that will help you a little more. Now, it doesn't really show up in my printout, but if I peek over at my image, I would say probably about here is where the ocean is, and it's going to be a slightly different color. So that's where I'm going to stop the sky. This feels a little too light to me still, so I think I'm going to add some more paint to try to get a nice heavy wash. You can also build up layers of color, but I want it to be a little bit more intense from the jump. So I'm just going to grab more indigo and just really get a lot on the brush this time. That's the only thing that's a little challenging with pans, I think. If you are trying to pull paint from your pan, you have to really work to kind of pull nice, heavy, thick paint off the pan. But it can definitely be done. It just takes a little more time. Okay, now I'm going to add some Payne's Gray because, like I said, I want it to be really deep and intense. Okay, and that looks pretty good. I'm just going to give it another spritz, but you can also just run more water over it with your brush if you're not using a spray bottle, and we'll just repeat the process. So it's nice and dark. Still think we're going to need another layer in the sky because it is going to lighten up as it dries. So watercolor does this thing called the drying shift. So it's kind of like when you go to the beach or maybe the river and you pick up a really pretty rock and it looks different once it dries. It doesn't look the same as it did when it was wet. That's kind of what watercolor is like too. So when it dries, it is a little less dark and a little less saturated or vibrant. So that's why it's helpful to work in layers. You have to kind of build up the intensity of the color and value. And if you also pulled your watercolor block or paper off the block, or even if you're still working on your block of paper, but you notice that it's starting to buckle like mine is, it will flatten out as it dries. It just happens when the paper gets wet and it's not being held down by anything. So don't worry, but you can definitely flatten it out once it's dry. There are a couple ways you can do that. One way, which is kind of funny, is if you put a t-shirt or a towel on top of your paper, you can actually iron it flat. Just use a very, very low setting on your iron. I've done that in a pinch before. Or another thing that you could do would be just to spray water on the back with a spray bottle, and then let it dry a tiny bit, and then put a towel or paper towels on top of your paper, and then put some heavy books on top and let it sit for a couple hours, or I would say probably 24 hours. And then that will that will flatten out your paper. So that's just a tip for you. If you find that your paper is a little bit too warped for your liking. Okay, so I'm going to take some of the same dark blue that we mixed up with the Payne's Gray and Indigo. And now I'm going to take, because it's kind of purpley because of the flame light, I'm going to add some of this red, this Madder Lake. And let me just give it another quick spritz just to keep everything wet. And now I'm going to start to blend some of this purple. And I'm starting from the bottom here because that's going to be where it's closer to the flame. So that's where that red would be coming from. And it's going to dissipate as it gets further out into the atmosphere. And if you make a mistake and accidentally go past your line, that's okay. It can be covered up later. All right, and then I'm also going to, just for fun and to kind of make the colors more interesting, I'm just going to add a little bit of this red to make it more intense towards the bottom. Okay, so this is really wet right now, and I want to let it dry a little bit because I don't want to overwork it. So while this part is drying, I am going to start to work on this flame area over here. So you'll notice that we've got this cool red, and you might want to add a little bit of a warmer red, especially in the area around the sand. So something that's really cool about this this lake, Madder Lake, is if you take some of this color, and some of you have seen me demonstrate this before, but I still think it's cool every time. So you take some of this, and you take a little bit of yellow and add that. You're going to get, it's a little orangey right now. I'll add a little bit more of the rose madder. But you're going to get a more crimson red color, which I think is really great because that gives you more flexibility. So you can have a warm red and a cool red in your palette, which is part of why I liked this one so much, because I feel like I can do more with it and have more interesting combinations of color mixes by having a cool red in addition to a warm red, because I can just warm it up. And then I do think it's a little harder to cool down a red because the cool colors tend to overpower the warm colors a little. So just something I think is pretty neat. So now I've got a red, a warm red, a cool red, an orange, and a yellow. So lots to work with. So when we're looking at the flame here, I'm going to erase some of the lines just a little bit, because we're gonna leave the paper white in the middle. I'm gonna zoom in just a little bit so that you can see. It's very faint, but I do have my drawing here, so hopefully you can see that okay. So the light source is coming from the center of the flame, and that's going to be the hottest part of the flame, and that is going to be what we're going to leave white. So we can start to add a little bit of yellow around it, a little bit of maybe a yellowy orange. So I might kind of mix these two together just to make it a little less yellow. And I'm just going to kind of start to paint in some shapes. This is like where the sticks are in the flame. And I'm going to be careful to leave the center alone. And then the other thing I'm going to be thinking about, and I'm just going to erase some more of these lines a little bit. Got to be careful when you're erasing and brushing away your little eraser bits so that you don't accidentally smudge your paint. So I'm going to take a little bit more of my kind of dark yellow mixture here. And I'm just going to look for the edges where the figures have a highlight on them. There's going to be a pretty sharp contrast between light and dark here, because there's one really strong light source and everything else is dark. So I do think that, makes it a little challenging, but the nice thing is that it really creates a good sense of atmosphere, and having the contrast does make it a little bit easier to identify where things go. All right, now I'm going to add just some, I'm going to really water down this yellow because I want it to be very light. And I'm just kind of painting an ambiguous shape. Doesn't have too much form definition. And I'm starting with my lightest colors for this part, because typically when you work with watercolor, it's a little different than how you would work with a drawing, where you would go from dark to light in terms of your values. But with watercolor, you work from light to dark, because you need to kind of plan in advance where all your light colors will be, because you can't work subtractively. I mean, you can a little bit, but it's more difficult to take away dark values that you've added than it is to add them, because of how watercolor is, and you're meant to use the white of the paper for your highlights. So that's why it's a little bit of a different approach than you would with a traditional drawing medium, or traditional painting medium, I should say. Like acrylics, you would work dark to light, because you can add your light values back in with opaque light colored paints. These are all transparent, so it's a little different. All right, so now I want to add, you can see in this reference image, there's some light that's starting to scatter upward. So I'm going to add in where it's kind of scattering. And it's okay if a little bit touches. Mine did and is starting to drag. That's okay. I'm actually going to kind of blend it out a little bit in just a minute. But taking some clear water, clean water, just gonna soften out the edges. And just blend a little bit. So a lot of this is going to get blended out, but I'm kind of mapping out now where some of the highlights in the sand are getting scattered out. Okay. And now I'm going to do the same thing I did before. Just take the clear water and just soften and blend that out.
Hey, Amelia, it's Sarah jumping in here.
Hi.
I was listening to you painting here, and it almost feels like a little bit of like an ASMR moment where
Oh, yes.
you can hear the brush hitting the water cup and you can sort of
Yes.
hear the brush strokes. It just was very zen for a moment.
I love that. That's good.
Yeah. And for those of you who are joining us, what you're looking at right now is not the final piece. It is like if you're just joining us, it probably looks quite questionable. We've got a night sky and a bonfire on a beach, so coming, it's happening.
Yes.
Awesome. We're almost about halfway through class, so I just wanted to give you a time update there.
Awesome. Thank you.
No problem.
All right, so now I am kind of going in and starting to blend that purple and orange together. So just using, I'm clearing off my brush between the strokes and just pulling some clean water in to blend that out. All right. So now I'm kind of in this middle part, and I'm just gonna try not to push my paper away. And now I'm just gonna kind of blend out a little bit the light that's scattering. Because in our picture, we'll see this middle part is not as defined as the edges on the sides. So I'm just gonna kind of lighten that up a little bit. And here's where a paper towel can come in handy. If you have too much water, you can start to blot up some of that. Fighting with my paper towel over here. Oh my gosh. Keeps trying to run away. Okay. All right. So now I'm going to go in and start adding in, lighten this up a little bit over here. Paper towels is not too wet. Okay. I'm going to go in and now I'm going to start filling in where there's some of the ocean and then some of the shadows in the sand, as well as some of the shadows on the backs of the figures. So I'm going to take some of this Payne's Gray and make a little bit more of my indigo mixture. But this time I think I'm gonna add just a tiny bit of the rose madder. Just a tiny bit. And you'll notice that the sand is a little uneven. So I'm trying not to completely fill in the entire area, but I'm just kind of leaving some spaces where the light is being cast on the uneven surface. And that is going to make it look like the sandy area here. And I'm kind of using line as a way to get this uneven texture. So just painting in horizontal lines to kind of suggest that there is an uneven, bumpy, sandy surface. And it's okay if your colors blend a little bit too. And then I'm just going to add a couple little marks on here because it's getting lighter closer to the fire, so there's still some shadows being cast, but they're smaller because there's more light. And this is the great thing about this round brush is that you can kind of press down and get a bigger brush stroke, and using a lighter touch will give you a thinner, smaller, thinner line. And a trick that, if you've, like I was saying earlier, if you were taking a drawing class, you may have learned this grid drawing technique. But something else that's helpful as you're observing a reference image, or if you're drawing from life, is to just keep looking back at your reference. Just keep glancing at it as you draw, so that you are continuing to observe what you see in front of you, rather than starting to draw what you think you know. I think that's often where there's kind of a disconnect between trying to draw what we see in front of us. And it can feel a little frustrating when what you're drawing doesn't look like what your reference is, but you have to really practice and train yourself to be looking more at whatever it is you're observing than what you're putting down on your paper. But that's just like anything, it's a skill that takes practice, and it applies to painting as much as it does drawing. I feel like sometimes, especially with watercolor painting, it's very close to drawing, just in terms of if you're sort of sketching with your paint. But everybody kind of thinks about it differently. Move this up for you a little bit so you can see better. All right. So now I want to try to fill in this area down towards the bottom. So general rule of thumb, your values are going to get darker, closer to the foreground, just the part that's closest to you as the viewer. But since we're working with light here, that's going to vary a little bit where we have our light source. And then there's these cool like flares of light coming off. And by cool, I mean cool, interesting, not cool in terms of color temperature. I'm just going to go outside of the line where I said I was going to end things. And then so that the edges aren't so defined, just take some water, blend it out. And if you have any edges where your color dried and left kind of a line that you don't want, just use a clean brush with clear water, and you can start to kind of erase out some of the paint. It won't erase it completely, but it will lighten it up. So if it doesn't dry quite like you wanted it to, you have some control to change it. Blend that out. Okay, so it's coming along. We're getting there. But we do have to build in a little more color, and I want to go back and fill out the sky a little more because it dried, and we have some uneven areas where I was going in and kind of trying to lighten up where our flares of light were coming from. So I'm just going to try lighten that up a little bit more. Okay. go in with some purple. Got that a little darker. I'm just throwing some Payne's Gray back in there. It's a little too light for my liking. Okay, so this is kind of where the ocean is in this image. And while this area is drying, since it's in between two of the parts I need to work on a little more, I'm going to add, I think I'm actually going to add some just plain Payne's Gray here. And actually, I can switch to a smaller brush. So I have a little more control. So I think before I was using, what size was this one? The 6? I think I'm going to switch over to the 4. So I'm just going to take Payne's Gray, and I'm just going to kind of fill in our figures. And because of how contrasted and dark they are compared to the flame, you can really just kind of create a silhouette here. So don't worry too much about having a lot of details. Just the general shape is going to be good enough. So you can't really see a ton of detail, but you kind of get the sense that there's a figure here. And I think that that's good. Because you can start to tell what's happening. Something else that's really helpful when you are painting something that you're observing is looking at the negative space around shapes, which is kind of what I'm doing right now. So I'm filling in the shadows between the figure and this bonfire flames, and just filling in those shadows from there. And that can be really helpful as you observe, figuring out how much space is in between something by looking at that negative space there. Again, our minds will kind of trick us into thinking that we're seeing something that we're really not, because part of how we interpret information is to simplify things into symbols, and that's part of why when we do our drawings, sometimes it can be frustrating they don't look realistic, because it makes sense to create a symbol versus adding in all that information. So, but it helps having techniques like looking at negative space, looking at shapes, general shapes, using grids. It's a key. to kind of simplify the process. And you can see why I started with my light colors first, is now I can go in and just cover up areas and work kind of backwards a little bit. So just kind of put that under layer in there. And now I can fill in the details with the darker colors. I'm just going to crease this out. Bring that kind of flare / smoke shape back a little. And you'll see I'm not really using a whole lot of precision. I'm just kind of drawing some little dashes and filling in where I think it needs to be darker. So if you aren't really strong at drawing, that's okay. You can kind of just follow the same process. Just kind of scribble in a little bit of shape, because the details aren't very important. You don't have to get it exactly as you see it. And that's kind of what I was saying about how our brains read information as symbols, create symbols. So as long as you have the general silhouette, you don't need a lot of details to understand what you're looking at. All right, general shape in there. Okay, so now you can kind of start to tell that there's two figures here. But like I said, didn't need to really try to painstakingly add in all the detail. You kind of get the idea from just these symbols and silhouettes alone. All right, I'm gonna take this purple, kind of soften it out here. And I'll fill in some of the darker areas over here. All right, so we kind of have our central figures in there. I'm going to switch back over to my bigger brush now, and I'm going to add in more of those dark, heavy shadows, and I'm going to use the Payne's Gray for that. All right, so I made this a little bit thicker of a mixture than the last time. And now I'm just going to go over some of those areas, add another layer just to build up more value and color, and just to make it seem like the shadows are darker further out. So you can see how building up the layers makes a difference. You know, you kind of get those underpainting established, and then you can go on top and they'll start to come through with it being transparent. You know, you can start to see those colors underneath. It's very much a matter of trusting the process. It's not always going to look like how you want it to look at first, but you have to kind of let it dry and keep adding to it, and eventually it will get to the point that you want it to look like. But I think that's true of art in almost any medium. Maybe why sometimes people get frustrated because they don't wait until that last step where it starts to look like what they want. So you just have to keep going, even if it doesn't seem like it's turning out the way you think it should. Okay, so while this part's drying, now I'm going to go back up to the sky, and I want to make that darker. Not too dark though. I think I'm just going to kind of darken it up by the top because again, we've got our light source. And the sky always does kind of get a little bit lighter by the horizon. So I'm going to just add some more of the Payne's Gray. This time I'm not going to do the wet in wet because I want the color to be heavier and a little more controlled. And you can see how when I use the side of my brush, I do get more coverage and a broader brush stroke. So, you know, that's again the great thing about the round brushes. There's that versatility. It's a really great brush, especially if you're a beginner watercolor painter, because you can do so much and so many techniques with this type of brush. So it's really great for that. I do like the sound of the pipette. What Sarah was saying earlier, it's kind of like ASMR. It's like a nice bubbly sound. I do like that. Okay. So now I'm kind of just touching up the edges a little bit, but I don't want to do too much in the middle. I'm going to kind of leave that how it is. So now I'm just kind of painting around the edges here. And I'm actually going to kind of do a little bit of like a circular shape. And I am going to soften this out in the middle using the plain water technique. Okay. Kind of there. All right, now you take this. And I'm just kind of using like a circular scrubbing motion. And that is kind of how I'm just softening out the color. I'm kind of jumping back and forth between grabbing some more paint to fill out the edges. And then I'm going to go back to just clear water. All right, so you can see how I was kind of following the shape that I wanted it to have by just using the brush stroke in that direction. And then, again, just kind of softening it up a little, moving the paint around on the paper. All right, so now you can kind of see how like there's light coming out and it's softening out, darker out by the edges. I'm going to fix this little spot over here that seemed to have puddled a little. Okay. All right, I think this is starting to come together. Doesn't look exactly like the reference photo, but I think that's okay. I was just talking to one of the illustration classes I teach about how to use reference images, and something that I share with them is that you don't want to rely too much on the reference that you're working on, because you want it to be your own unique piece of artwork. So it's nice when, it's not exactly photorealistically a copy of what it is that you're looking at. Because, we have cameras and it's really cool and impressive to have a photorealistic painting skill. But I also think that you don't have to feel pressure to paint like that if, you don't get it that way the first time. It's okay if it's a little bit off, if things are a little wonky, because it has your own unique spin and it makes it look like it was created by you, which is what makes art so special and why it's awesome that people can make art. It's as unique as the person that created it. So I definitely think that, it's okay if it's not exactly what you were looking at. So I think that that's important, especially for anybody who might be a beginner artist or is just kind of starting out with making art and painting. Don't feel pressured or like you're not doing a good enough job if it doesn't look exactly like what it is that you're trying to replicate.
Amelia, I think this looks amazing.
Thank you.
You're right. It doesn't have to be picture perfect the way that the original is. The sort of spin that you've taken on it, it looks so good. Can you bring
Thanks.
the paper close up to the camera so we can see the detail of the
Sure.
two people near the flame?
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yes,
In a good way.
yeah, like I feel like once I learned that you can make things look like other things without a lot of detail. I was like, wow, that's so freeing. You can tell what
Yeah,
it is without having to like stress yourself out over getting every teeny tiny detail.
exactly. And I also like how, I mean, in the original photo, it's people on a beach. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, I feel like these people are anywhere. They're like on the moon
Mm-hmm.
or they're in a field or
Yeah.
it just takes you in so many other directions. It looks
Yeah.
great.
It allows space for imagination, which I think is very cool.
Totally. Now, I do want to pop in here and tell you that you technically have 20 minutes left, but if you feel that it is not going to be, if it's going to be done before 20 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
amazing. You let me know how you want
Yeah.
to wrap up.
Sure. Well, I think I only have a couple little details left that we can start adding in.
Okay.
So we can start doing that, and then once we've added our details, I think we'll kind of wrap up for
Okay.
the night. So
Carry on.
thanks. All right. So let me show everybody how. Sorry for some clanking as I move some things around. I'm going to show you the last step for this, which is going to be to add in a couple little details using our white paint. So the white watercolor, it's a little different than gouache. It's not quite as opaque as gouache, but it is more opaque and a little heavier than some of the other paints in the palette. So I have been having a lot of fun figuring out how I might use some of the white paint. And I think we've got some great little areas where we can start to add in those details with the white paint. So I'm taking my smallest brush, which this is a size 2, and I'm just going to add in some dots. Now mine spread out a little bit more, but that's okay because these will also dry lighter than they look when they first go on the paper. And I kind of like that it's spreading out across the paint like that. But I'm just adding in dots randomly as stars. You could also, if you're feeling brave, you could do a splatter technique where you just kind of tap your brush. You need to have really watered down paint for that, but that would also be a great way to add some stars. But I'm just adding them in by hand. And this can be a really fun, relaxing thing to do, just adding in lots of little dots. And then I'll show you a cool technique you can do. You're welcome to add as many stars as you want, but you can take your brush. I'm going to try it without anything on it. So this is totally clean brush. And then just draw a little X over some of the dots. Whoops, try not to put your hand in your paint. And that's going to kind of make them look like they're twinkling, extra twinkly. But it helps to do this while the paint is still wet. Otherwise, you can just add some more paint to your brush. So now you've got some twinkly ones, and I'll hold it up so you can see it's very subtle, but you can see there's a couple that I just pulled the paint to make sparkles. And you might have to do a couple layers of this because, like I was saying, um, this will kind of um, lighten up a little bit. I'm going to kind of blend this out. And I'm going to add stars back on top of this. So you can always kind of just fix things a little if you don't love them. Now it just looks extra shiny. There. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. And then the last place I'm going to add just a little bit of this white is going to be in the center of the flame here. I'll just lighten that up a little bit more. You could also mix this with some yellow or orange, and that will, you can go back in and add some highlights. I will say though, if you try to paint over top of any of the darker areas, it will start to lift and reactivate the paint. So just be aware that it might smudge a little. So you can't really do too much adding on top. But I think I'm gonna maybe mix in a little yellow and just kind of bring that flare out a little bit more. So you can go in and just add a little more details in places if you want. But yeah, so that's pretty much everything for this painting. So I do think it came out pretty nicely. Again, different than the reference, but you know, it's a unique image, which is great. And the last thing to do with all your paintings, of course, is to sign them so that people know it's yours. And that's it. So thank you all so much for joining. I hope that you had a chance to just paint along, or even if you were just listening, that you learned something new. And yeah, I would love to see if you guys did follow along and create your own paintings. You can share them on Art Snacks Mix in the Watercolor Snacks group. Or if you like to use Instagram, you can share on Instagram and tag the Watercolor Snacks account. And I'd be really happy to share that in our stories so that other people can see what you're working on. So, but yeah, thank you all.
This one is so cool and so different from pretty much everything that you've created. So I applaud you. This is a nice step outside of the box, the usual box that we're in.
Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you everyone who is joining us live. As you know, this is recorded, so it'll be hanging out on our YouTube channel forever, as most things live on the internet. So yeah, Amelia, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate you guys hanging out with me tonight.
Awesome. All right. We will see you on ArtSnacks Mix. And the last live stream for the summer box is coming in October. So